Franklin Covey's C-Suite Conversations. My name is Patrick Ledden, and each week I have the honor of sitting down and talking to an executive leader. We talk about their life, their work, what they've learned along the way, the struggles they've overcome, and the successes they've achieved, all with one thought in mind, to help you, the listener, on your journey. Regardless of wherever you are in your journey right now, I guarantee you the insights you gain from these podcast interviews will be so helpful to you. I know they are to me. Today, I'm joined by Noah Kerner. Noah is the chairman of Acorns, an organization that's focused on helping individuals level the playing field when it comes to finance. Understanding finance, having access to capital, making good decisions from their youth all the way through their adulthood. Trust me, you're going to want to grab something to write with, because Noah's going to talk to us a lot today about purpose and being less fearful, making tough decisions, and stepping out in directions that really align with what mattered most to you. Hey, Noah Kerner, thanks so much for joining me today for a C-Suite conversation.
Good to be here, Patrick.
Good to have you here. I'm so excited for the audience to have a chance to get to know you a little bit and learn from your experience. I know from your background that you've done a lot of things, but instead of me telling about some of those things, if you don't mind, would you tell us a little bit about your career and how you ended up sitting in the seat you're in right now?
Totally. So I grew up in the East Village of New York City. I look at my career in sort of three stages. The first was a creative stage. I got turntables as a 14th birthday gift from my father and started practicing and locking myself in my bedroom till like 4 o'clock in the morning every night, getting ready to learn how to DJ as an artist. And starting at around 16, I began performing in hip hop nightclubs, and that sort of progressed to working with artists and things like this. And that was like really the early stage of my professional life, kind of chapter one. Chapter two was probably creative business pursuits. So my first three companies were in the hip hop space, in the creative services space, and a music agency. And that was around a 10, 12-year run. And at that point, I got hit with I need to feel extreme purpose in my professional life. And I want to do work that delivers what I consider to be important value to society. And that's like that was the last chapter. That's the chapter I'm in. That's the chapter I plan to stay in. And that's where Acorns has been built. I built another company called Say, which helps give new investors access to shareholder rights and give them more of a voice in the process of being an investor, and co-founded a charity organization with my wife called Give Kids Art that gives art programming and art kits to kids who don't come from a lot, and then was on the board of Save the Music for many years, which delivers music programming to similar type kids, and working on a project with UCSF Department of Neurology to try to figure out the cause of migraines. So operating really in financial wellness, health, interested in education, and we do a lot of work in that space as well. I have passion for the environment, and then arts for kids. Those were kind of the five areas that when I decided, where was I going to focus my time moving forward, landed on those areas.
Those are great areas to land on. As you were going through this, I'm like, he hit my heart. He hit a point there I wanted to ask him about. He hit another point I wanted to ask him about. So I'm going to walk you through, if you don't mind, kind of those three stages. So we'll get to a little bit. We'll get to more about what you're working on right now and some of these, things that are really fueling your purpose. But let's go back earlier on. You mentioned about kind of in that creative stage. I did have in my notes, DJing and hip hop nightclubs across New York City and performing with artists like Jennifer Lopez. So I know you got the turntables at 14. What did that fire up inside you? And maybe even like, what did that teach you? Because there's some people right now who maybe I've done this. I don't know. You'll kind of think, well, that's something I pack away and I did in the past, and there's not a lot of value carrying forward. But I would bet you tell me I was wrong. I bet you would tell me, there's some things that I learned in those type of roles that have really carried forward for me.
There's this odd line of reasoning that I keep hearing, which says something like, no, don't actually pursue your passion. Pursue what you can do that will help you make a living. And, the reason I got into DJing was purely because I thought it was fascinating and I loved the creativity of it. And I was fascinated by hip hop culture as a kid growing up in the city, particularly really the DJ side of it and the beats. and I got into it because I was really passionate about it, and it became something that I was obsessed with. And when you get obsessed with something, you prioritize getting good at it. And in the case of DJing, getting good at it also meant that I could have opportunities to perform, make money, build an early career and a life and all that kind of stuff. So I think when you're passionate about something and you get obsessed with it, you're better at it. You're more enthusiastic. Enthusiasm, is infectious. And so but you asked, like, why did I mean, I got into it purely because I was fascinated by it. I loved it. And I allowed myself to just get immersed in it. And it was really probably 2 years where I don't know, how many hours I committed myself to learning like every single scratch, like how to coordinate your hands, your left hand and your right hand with the fader and on the record to get them in sync. By the way, my stuff has been in storage for 15 years and we just brought it back out. And within like an hour or two, my brain came back online. My hands and my brain came back online. It was a little miscalibrated for a minute.
Yeah, yeah.
But it's, and I got into the I would say the craft of DJing. I would watch every battle DJ. In DJ culture, there's a thing called the DMC, and that's the World DJ Competition. And you see these incredible artists basically creating new music with existing music, doing what you call beat juggling and scratching and all this stuff. And I just thought, this is incredible. So.
No, it's interesting as you say that, because I think you're right. I mean, especially if I can figure out, like, what am I passionate about? What am I talented at? Like, that I can invest time into and build some more skills around. And then kind of what does the world need? Or what's my inner voice or conscience telling me? Is there like a space in the world? If you can figure out how to line those three things up, you're doing pretty well. So if you say, like, I had a passion for this, I had some talent and just kept working and becoming more and more proficient in my skills so that I actually could stand out in a crowd. And at the same time, I'm bringing entertainment to people that I clearly see that what I'm bringing is valuable to them. That's a pretty powerful mix.
Yeah.
And I used the word mix. Go figure.
You did. Nice. My parents, like my parents knew a lot of psychologists. That was the thing, in the city. And I was very early on fascinated by psychology and human psychology. I would say that's been a passion and fascination of mine all the way through. And one of the things about DJing is that it really allowed me to explore human psychology in a different way. And that was really early on, getting to observe, connect with, understand, lose, recapture crowds. I probably found that as fascinating as the art form itself. While you're up there, just getting lost in the crowd, becoming part of the crowd, getting to know the dynamics of crowd and every movement, that has been so instructive in my life and career since then. And I've gotten asked a lot, like, how does DJing prepare you for it? And that's really the way something like that, the creative arts, performing in a crowd, if you pay attention to what's happening and observe people, it really prepares you for anything you're going to do. Because ultimately, most things come back to how well you understand people.
Oh, that's so true. Yeah, it's funny as you're talking about that. I'm reminded of an interview I did a while back where I was talking to this gentleman who was a jazz musician, and he was able to pull forward so many things from that experience of being a jazz musician that helped him around, collaboration and communication and interacting and innovating with others, and the ability to kind of riff within a theme and just all these type of things. And that there's certain rules or boundaries, but then there's like a lot that aren't rules and boundaries, and just kind of trying to how that helped him in his career. That's why I was asking about this, because I would imagine even if you packed up all your equipment and put it away for 15 years, those skills or that mindset or that approach really is helpful to you. And the reason I wanted people to hear you talk about that, and I'd love for you to chat any more you want to about sharing about that, how you've applied it, is because I think sometimes we tend to sell ourselves short a little bit. Maybe you're listening to the podcast right now and you're like, well, that stuff I did in my youth, or that stuff I did earlier on, or that's not applicable here. And I would make an argument, maybe you need to go back and re-examine some of those things, because they actually be really helpful to you.
Yeah, well, I'll say two things. You said improvisation, and that's a great point, because when you're performing in a nightclub, for example, like, I didn't have a set playlist. I mean, I would improvise all the time, and I would decide what records to play when, and I had to figure out how to mix a new record into a record I had never mixed before. And you're constantly improvising to figure out how to keep the crowd engaged. And that skill, that muscle you're building of like, it really teaches you how to stay fast on your feet, you know, how to respond to quick incoming information and different information and stay agile and all that kind of stuff. And like, you know, anything you do is going to be a constant exercise in that. I mean, you're constantly bombarded by information. And the more you build that skill and that ability to, with resilience, respond to lots of stuff and not get overwhelmed by it, I think that's a really important thing. In terms of doing it now, I think it's corny when people like who run companies DJ nightclub. Like, I don't understand. To me, you know, I just, but I do it now as pure creative expression in my house. And there's something really important and grounding about creativity and having creative outlets. You know, it just, there's something about it that just gets you deeper in touch with yourself, you know? And this is why I love working on giving kids art, because the more you can learn to creatively express yourself, the more of a full whole person, you know, you'll be. And accessing those kind of things inside of you that may not come out when you're talking or interacting with people is like, this is more of like the unconscious reservoir, you know, of inspiration inside of you that comes out, that you allow yourself to come out in the moment.
Well, as you're saying that, I was reminded of a couple things. At Franklin Company, we talk about the whole person paradigm, that working with employees or team members and looking at them as their whole person, right? They've got their mind, and they've got their heart or relationships. They've got their intellect. I already said that, the intellect, their body, they've got their heart, and they've got their relationships, and really kind of drawing from all of those. And I came up in a conversation I was having with somebody this morning. It was talking about, you know, my people get this intellectually, like they know we need to go this particular direction, but they're not moving there. And the reason they're not moving there, this person was assessing, is because they haven't like emotionally made that jump. Like the difference space between my head and my hands is kind of has to go through my heart, or however you want to look at that. And the people just aren't getting on board with that. And the idea of like recognizing that they're whole people, like how art can tap into something emotional for someone, or music can tap into something emotional for someone, and almost unlock other things, is really kind of a key component as any leader, is to recognize that you have whole people in front of you, and that you got to tap into what they bring to the table.
Which starts by understanding what each person brings to the table. Fair. And what moves each person. You know, I think as a leader, everything begins with caring about the person you manage and putting the time in to understand who they are, what's important to them, what inspires them, what demotivates them. Just really putting in the time to getting to know them and paying attention to them. You can't inspire somebody unless you understand them.
It's so funny you say that. I was in another meeting. I've had a lot of meetings today. I was in another meeting today. We've been talking about developing leaders, and you mentioned this idea of care and how critical it is, because we're kind of like using this language around care a lot, expect a lot type of thing. Like as a leader, you should expect a lot for your people, but you should also care a lot for them, and that might oftentimes come first, or it oftentimes comes first. I mean, I think it's a really critical thing. How does it show up in your world? Like, how do you let the people you know that you work with, that you care about them? What does that look like?
And I would say if that's not a natural instinct for you, you probably should build a career as an individual contributor, perhaps, or a principal, something, you know what I mean? Because if your natural proclivity is not to care about people, not to get your excitement when other people thrive, that kind of thing, it's tough to be an inspiring leader. I think everybody feels.
But I would imagine there's some people that maybe like they have empathy for others. Maybe they're just not bringing it into the workplace, or maybe they need to practice, getting that scratch sequence, going for themselves too, working on those skills.
For sure. I just would say, like, don't force yourself to be something you might not be just because you're supposed to be.
Yeah, that's a great
point.
And
I think a lot of people feel like I think a lot of people feel like the way to move up, and often it is the way to move up, is you go from this level to this level. Now you manage people, and then the Peter principle happens, and you're suddenly not able to manage more people at this scale because you're not actually really a manager, or that a people leader first and foremost in your heart. You're a person who does incredible work and executes, and thus principal engineer, principal designer roles, that that kind of stuff.
And we need a lot of those folks, but you're right. I mean, leadership is tough. You have to make difficult decisions. You have to have difficult conversations, and you have to care about people.
Yeah, just my natural inclination. You asked the question, I just like to get to know people, and I want to get to know each person, and I put the time in to do that. Spend a lot of time on the phone, try to spend time in person, get to know about the person's life, their family, if they're having any issues, whatever it is. I'm actually interested to know that everything's going well. If something's not going well, why? I don't like to gloss over things. I don't like to do the fake positivity bullshit. Like, tell me what's really going on. When you ask someone how they're doing, and when someone asks you how are you doing, and then they go good, you're like, you're not really interested in how I'm doing. You just answered good for me. So you just want me to say everything's great. And I don't think everything's great in anyone's life. So I want to know the good, the bad, everything in between. That's important to me. And I think people I work with know that.
One of the expression that kind of, everybody's got their thing that kind of drives them a little crazy, but one that drives me a little bit crazy sometimes when I hear it, and I understand the intent, what they're saying. Sometimes they don't mean it the way I interpret it a lot. But when it's like, I've got to get them to feel like I've heard them, or to feel like I'm listening to them, or feel like I care. It's like, Why don't you just care? Now, I understand that, like, you want them to perceive it and understand it that way. But it's when you say feel like, it's not you, but when people say feel like something, it feels like I want to manipulate them to the point where they feel like I care. And then I can lower the boom or whatever it might be, or raise expectations, as opposed to just care. And they'll know you care.
Yeah, it somehow reminds me of, I interview everybody we hire. Actually, I still interview everybody we hire, and so I've interviewed thousands of people, and even my interviews are about the person. Why? What motivates you? Why do you want to come here? Why did you decide to do what you do? What are you inspired by? What are you interested in? These kinds of questions. And a lot of times when I ask, like, why did you decide to go into business? When you really get down to it, a lot of people just like just cause, well, it's kind of what you do, or I didn't know what else, so I did, and it's just sort of this like place you go when you don't kind of know who you are exactly or what. So it ends up being a place where a lot of people, it's like a lot of people who didn't quite know their purpose or didn't, and may not have found it, end up. It's like a repository for, I'm not sure what I'm supposed to be doing. And I think I like to challenge people to really put the time in early to figure out what it is that does connect with you. Don't just get on a ride. Like, put the time in for yourself, reflect, go into therapy, whatever you need to do to understand yourself more deeply before you set yourself out on a course that's probably going to be pretty defining and maybe perhaps even permanent. Because what you don't want to do is end up at the end looking back and going, what the did I just spend my life doing? My last question in every interview is I try to get people to place themselves in the future, which is hard to do, and ask them to reflect back on their lives and say, if you can imagine how you'd like to be remembered, if you're in a future state, and imagine, look back on your life, how would you like to be remembered? And I think most of the time people haven't done that exercise. And, it's an important exercise to do.
Well, you talked about the 3 stages, right, of your career so far. We talked about the DJ piece, and you worked in the creative space as well as in the business side of the creative space. And then you talked about the current stage you're in right now. And I read, to this point you were just talking about, I read something you wrote. You said, someone once asked me if I knew my purpose. I didn't have an answer, so the person suggested I try to write it down. Without thinking, you wrote down, level the playing field. So I guess I could ask you, like, define what that means, because I don't want to assume something. But, what are your thoughts about that exercise? And you said without thinking, it was kind of there, just hadn't been expressed yet. I mean, there's a lot in that. And how was that clarity so helpful for you?
Yeah, it's kind of like going in the room, turning on the turntables, putting on a record, and just scratching and seeing what comes out. That is the authentic version of like what's inside. And so, like, level the playing field. I didn't actually write it. It wrote itself. It was the first thing that came out. And I felt a very natural connection to that idea. and it felt like something worth spending my time on. And then I reflected on it in terms of like, where did that come from, inside of me? And I look back all the way to my childhood and to think about like, where did I become fascinated by, interested in, aware of the playing field? And the meaning the playing field is like, it's really uneven. And if you can spend your time, like Acorns is about financial wellness, is about putting the responsible tools of wealth making in everyone else's hands. So how does that relate to the idea of leveling the playing field? I mean, we're working every day to give people access to responsible investing, to financial literacy, to things that they didn't have access to before. And a lot of the stories you hear from our customers are like, I'm the first person in my family to have started saving for retirement, it's et cetera, et cetera. And that, you could call it a purpose statement or a mission statement, whatever, then became my filter for what I spend my time professionally doing. And that was immensely valuable, because now it's really easy to say yes, and it's really easy to say no. A lot of people have trouble saying no to things. I have a device for no, which is, listen, I think what you're doing is really interesting. If someone asks like for an investment or something like that, and it's not in the purpose statement, I think what you're doing is really interesting, but I have a very specific purpose that I focus on, and this just doesn't happen to fit within that. So it's a very, very easy device for yes and no in decision making.
It's actually a pretty liberating thing, and it's interesting when you were going on earlier about the three stages, and you said, I just jotted the notes down. You said like in this stage I'm in right now, and you were about living out this purpose. You said, so I get involved in financial wellness, health, education, environment, and art for kids. Those are the ones I wrote down, right? So there's one side of me that could go, wow, that's 5 things. That's a lot of stuff, right? That you're but then when you realize your clarity of your purpose, all of a sudden it's like, well, no, those are all interconnected things. Those are all pointing toward the same thing, right? Because sometimes I'll have people say to me, why, Patrick, you got hands in a lot of different things. And I'm like, yeah, but in my mind, it's all about the same thing in my purpose, which is, I just love that anything you can say that would encourage people who haven't done it to go do it. Anybody who has done it and hasn't been living by it or visiting it, to encourage them to do it. I just love for you to share those, because it is a very liberating thing, I think.
Just like whatever creates a sense of calm for you, get into that space for a moment on a Sunday. Take a pen, a piece of paper, and ask yourself the question, what is my purpose, or what do I want my purpose to be, in the case where you don't feel it's self-ordained, and just write. One of my mentors said to me early on, writing is thinking. And I thought that was a profound statement. Writing is thinking. It's in many ways the best access point to your unconscious. So just write, and write the answer. And what comes out is probably going to be very much connected to who you are and what you really care about. So it's a really worthwhile exercise. And by the way, if it's not the first, if for some reason the first statement doesn't connect, try it again. But the first one that comes out, that says something.
Yeah, it's kind of top of mind, if nothing else. Or it's, I imagine it's almost like a brainstorming thing. Sometimes you got to get the first one out of your mind. It might be the great one, but it's just the one you have to get out of your mind in order to dig deeper and see what's really in there. Because it's just kind of taking up RAM at that moment.
Yeah, I mean, and also like, what are the things you naturally gravitate toward? I always love the act of walking into a bookstore and paying attention to where you go, because where you go in the bookstore, of course, that's where your natural passions lie. I mean, I often go to the medical health. I'm fascinated with medicine. So I'll go there. And, if you're looking to figure out what it is that really matters to you, that really is meaningful to you, just pay attention to the things that pull you. And, maybe pay closer attention to those things, and then think about how you can apply that to your professional life. Of course, it's true, this line of reasoning that, well, Chris Rock had a funny joke, like, you should do what you're good at, or you should do what you'll get paid for, and what someone will pay you to do. And like, look, of course, there's times in life, or like a lot of situations people are in where it's like you have to get a job and you have to make a living and you have to provide for your family. So that is one thing. But of course, if 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 you are at one with what you're doing, you're just gonna be better. You're gonna be better at it. You're gonna be a better partner. You're gonna be a better parent, all the things. Better friend.
Well, let's talk a little bit about what you're working on right now and what's attracting your attention around Acorns. Tell us a little bit about what Acorns does, and how it taps in, how you tap into your purpose in the process.
So our mission statement is with benevolence and courage. Those are two really important words. I've spent a lot of time crafting those two words. With benevolence and courage, we look after the financial best interests of the up and coming, beginning with the empowering proud step of micro investing. The central focus of Acorns is helping everyday people, the working class, the middle class, whatever your designation might be, save and invest for the long term. And we call the end goal financial wellness. So making sure you're saving and investing as much money as you can so that you have comfort, confidence, peace of mind, and a sense of hope for the future. And we do that for individuals and we do it for families. One of the things I'm most excited about is that we have branched out into a focus on the whole family system. So now we have not just Acorns, but we have Acorns early. Parents can start investing in their kids beginning at birth. Kids at 6 years old can start learning about money. 7 or 8, you can get an allowance card that your parents can load money on for doing chores or learning about money. You can make decisions about what to do with the money your parents give you. So do you want to spend it on your allowance card? Do you want to save it? Do you want to give it? Ultimately, do you want to invest it? And, I feel back to the leveling the playing field, money is one of those areas where obviously the field is just, unbelievably uneven. And I look at like every little thing we can do to get people information, to get people tools of wealth making, to get parents saving and investing for their kids as early as possible, to get kids learning about money where schools might be teaching you math. We're going to teach you money. And this is very much a mission and a purpose. And we steer clear of the products that we think that we steer clear of the products that tend to get people into trouble. And we focus on the products that help people very centrally, like how do we make sure you're saving and investing as much money as possible for the future? Our investment products are all diversified portfolios of ETFs, and rounding up and investing the spare change, doing $5 a day, whatever, setting and forgetting what you've committed to investing, and then paying attention to how much that money will compound over time, because of course time is money, and investing is a marathon, not a sprint. So the longer you're investing, the longer you're doing $5 a day, the more you're going to benefit, the more your kids are going to benefit. The stat at 8% annual compound rate, $5 a day beginning at birth, if continued all the way through retirement, is $4.5 million for a kid. And at 18, if you start doing it for yourself, it's around $1.5 million. And to me, the conversation about the savings crisis or the retirement crisis in America, like if we want to save that, let's start with the two generations, Gen Alpha and the generation above that, and just get them on an automated investing plan and encourage them to stay committed and stick with it over the long term. And that's how you can really make a dent in the futures of the next generation and do a better job of leveling the playing field.
I'm curious, as you're going through that, I was just jotting some notes down, thinking about it, but I do agree, right? If at the youngest age possible, you can begin to understand the value of compounding interest. Certainly, if you can make some poor financial decisions when you're young, like how you spent that little bit of money you may have had, you make a mistake and go, okay, I don't ever want to do that again. I don't need 20 pounds of licorice or whatever it might be. You start to learn those lessons pretty early, are helpful. But as I think about the impact your organization's having, millions of everyday Americans are involved, tens of billions of dollars invested. That's a big impact. But then it's a big impact with a big need. So I mean, there's lots of opportunity to grow and impact more people, and at the same time, there's like you could just keep adding on. We could brainstorm 50 million solutions that you could bring in and different ways you could, okay, tap into children this way and help people with their business that way. When you're dealing with something that's growing quickly, kind of hyper growth, and at the same time, lots of opportunities, how do you, as a senior leader, help an organization like not forget who they are and why they exist, and really put your energy in the right places in that kind of hyper growth environment?
Yeah, I would say I see my role in the company as the holder of the mission and integrity of the company, and then the sort of disseminator of those things. And the process of building a culture that is really founded on a mission statement and founded on a set of values is very much an ongoing, sort of never-ending process of making decisions that uphold the mission and the value, deciding not to do things that are incongruous with the mission and the values, giving people active feedback when a decision is a little right or left of center, of the mission and the values, and ultimately managing the brand, which is sort of the sum, of the values, the mission, and all the collective actions of the people inside the company, and all the decisions that get made. I mean, every decision that gets made by everybody in the company that affects what we put out into the world affects our brand. So yeah, you have to have a really strong sense of cohesion around this thing. And by the way, a really, really ruthless focus. I mean, another piece of feedback I got when I was young. Actually, Panasonic. When I had a product development and marketing agency in my 20s, and Panasonic was a client, and the chairman of Panasonic was in New York, and we were out one night, and remember him putting his arm around me and telling me the most important thing in business is focus. And there are obviously a lot of things, but it's hard to argue with that point. That like the most important thing is focus, and keeping your company focused on a central mission, central values, purpose. And with us, everything comes back to how do we maximize your saving and investing potential. So if we're not doing that in the product, like we're not just adding products because that's what you do in financial services, or because that's going to make us more money, or because it's very much centered around the customer, what's best for the customer, and how do we maximize their saving and investing outcome. And that's it's actually totally antithetical to financial services companies' roadmaps, which are very much focused on next product, maximize revenue per customer. Ours is maximize value for the customer.
Well, I bet you, from being around, 5 successful startups that you've had, which, by the way, all great names. You're really good at the creative side of you. Naming is very clear. But I bet you've been around some folks who haven't done that well, and where they take off, and maybe there was an old. I remember Jim Collins years ago wrote How the Mighty Fail, but he talked about the idea, or fall. I can't remember what the title was. Mighty Fail, I think it is. But how sometimes you'll take off, and then you have this growth fueled by hubris. You feel like, oh, we can't do anything wrong, and it's because we're so brilliant, and not realizing that might be just timing or a lot of other things. But what have you seen on the other side of that coin, though? If you were to flip it over and say, okay, here's what I'm trying to focus on to help us, be focused as an organization and stay aligned with our purpose and all that. But you flip that coin over, and on the other side, you may have seen some folks, and maybe even your own experiences sometimes, where you kind of get that wrong. What does that look like when you get it wrong? It's like taking off, but then we can't seem to handle that growth.
Well, I think one question is, what is success?
Good question.
Yeah. The public markets have a very specific definition of what success is. And a lot of people will say success is maximizing shareholder value for a company. That's one definition of success. I view success as impact on consumers' lives, and derive a lot of satisfaction. In fact, the most satisfaction from trying to positively impact and add value. And the business is a vehicle through which to do that. And I would say a central thesis of Acorns is, if we do the right thing, we will grow a good business that customers feel connected to and trust. And ultimately that will lead to better business outcomes, better customer outcomes, and try to have a real symbiosis there. You know, one of the central characteristics in people that I look for when hiring them is courage. And I think it's really easy to get thrown off course when you build something with a particular purpose in mind, and the trappings of money or whatever invariably come your way. Those are the times where it's like, what are you really made of? Do you have the courage to stay the course and stay true to what you set out to do? And that takes a lot of commitment, and courage to your convictions, whether you're starting something or whatever you're doing.
Yeah, I agree. As we wrap up our conversation, I noticed a couple of times you mentioned like a mentor, or how that one gentleman kind of put his arm on your shoulders and talked to you a little bit about the importance of focus. Let's say, for example, you have one of those moments right now. So you're talking to the listeners of this podcast, regardless of where they are in their journey. They could be in the C-suite right now, and they're tuning in to say, I'd like to know what other executives are saying. Or they may be really earlier on in their career. Maybe they aspire to be in the C-suite. Maybe they don't at all. But whatever that might be, just what would you suggest to people is like one good piece of advice that you've learned along the way, over and above focus, that might be helpful to them on their journey, regardless of what they're trying to do?
We did a leadership offsite with a wonderful leadership coach for the team, and she asked us to write a poem. I think we had 10 minutes to write a poem. And the task was write a poem to your younger self. From imagine you're sitting on a couch and you're you, and you're sitting next to your younger self. What would you tell your younger self? I thought that was a great exercise, and also funny to see people in the business world writing poetry. And the title of my poem was Unfinished Work. And the point I made to my younger self is that you're always going to be unfinished work. You're never going to arrive. Your company will never arrive. You will never arrive. And so the prize is in the process.
That's a great piece of advice. Well, we talked about 3 stages in your career so far, but your point there is there'll be a stage 4 and 5 and 6 and on in life. And I just wish you all the best, Noah. And I appreciate you joining us today and sharing your wisdom with myself. I know I wrote a lot of notes, learned a lot from the conversation, and I know the listeners probably did as well. So thanks so much for joining us, Noah. I wish you all the best.
Appreciate the questions and the conversation. Take care, Patrick.
Yeah, it was fun. Well, folks, that's all I have for today's conversation. Big thanks to Noah Kerner for joining me for today's C-Suite Conversations. I really learned a lot from that conversation, and I'm going to go back and revisit and spend some time on my purpose, and I encourage you to do the same. That's all I have for today. Thanks so much for joining me. My name is Dr. Patrick Ledden. Now go make it a great day.